Did you get to, so you got to stay for 3 days at least?
I stayed for 3 days. Yeah. I was like, if I'm going all the way, I may as well hang out for a bit.
I did one crazy one in far north Queensland, and it was a 1 hour speaking gig, and it took about 2 days to get there because everything went wrong. It was like that movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Classic film.
And at the very end, I had someone rent a car for me and
Oh
drive
no. Okay. Right.
hours
Yeah.
to get to the final last bit of the leg. And then I did my 1 hour presentation, and it was really awful. I totally tanked. It was a sales conference for Optus, and then I went home with my tail between my legs. Imagine for a moment that you're self-employed or you have ambitions to become self-employed. Maybe you're doing something on the side and it's a side hustle and you want to take it full time. Or maybe you're just stuck in a miserable job and you want to become your own boss. There are so many different things that you need to think about, so many different things that you need to consider. Today, we're going to be talking about 3 of the most important things you need to get right if you want to go out on your own and make your side hustle, your passion, your thing, your main profession, and turn it into a real long-term sustainable business. To help me out, I have with me right here, right now, Karan Anand. He is the managing director of Henry in Australia. He's done a bunch of interesting things in his professional life, a bunch of things for young Sikhs in Australia. And just recently, you were in Bangalore, mate. What were you doing in Bangalore?
Yeah, thanks, James. Really great to be on the podcast. I was in Bangalore for 3 days last week. They flew me over to speak on a panel for an hour at the Australia-India Youth Dialogue, which is a young leaders diplomatic dialogue between the two countries. I'm based in Australia. I'm of Indian heritage, and for Australia, it's very fast becoming one of our most important bilateral relationships. So I was pretty excited. You know, it's not a short flight to India. Everywhere's bloody far away from Australia, and India is not one of the close places. So yeah, 12-hour flight to go speak for an hour. It's the biggest ratio I've ever had from flying time to speaking time.
Wow, that's right. Yeah, you got to travel for 12 hours, and then did you get to, so you got to stay for 3 days at least?
I stayed for 3 days. Yeah. I was like, if I'm going all the way, I may as well hang out for a bit.
I did one crazy one in far north Queensland, and it was a 1 hour speaking gig, and it took about 2 days to get there because everything went wrong. It was like that movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Classic film.
And at the very end, I had someone rent a car for me and drive
Okay,
hours
right.
to get to the final last bit of the leg. And then I did my 1 hour presentation, and it was really awful. I totally tanked. It was a sales conference for Optus, and then I went home with my tail between my legs. I hope that your event in Bangalore went a whole lot better. What was the highlight of your trip?
So we were staying at the Infosys campus. So Infosys is a global technology outsourcing company based in Bangalore, and we were in their the presentation was in their boardroom, which looked like, I felt like I was somewhere in between either United Nations or Dr. Evil's lair. And we finished it, and it was like people taking selfies going, I can't believe I'm sitting in here. And we were told afterwards that this was their backup boardroom. Like they have one even more impressive than this. And I'm like, like, again, we live in the country of like tall poppy syndrome. Like if Qantas had a boardroom like that, they're getting eaten up alive in the press anyway. Like that would just be the death knell for them. And I was like, this is outrageous, right? There's just big companies with lots of dollars, and this is how they spend them, which I thought was awesome. But once in a lifetime experience.
It is. It's about making an impression, and I totally understand that. Now, we've got a couple of things that we're going to talk about today. One of them is how to get regular work. One of the things is how to price your services. Another thing is how to get paid. Tell me a little bit about Henry and where Henry comes from and its background.
Sure. So we're a digital accountancy for the self-employed based in New Zealand and Australia. We're a New Zealand founded company. We're about 6 years old now. And essentially with Henry, you get 3 things. So the principle around Henry is making sure that when you're self-employed, you're working for yourself, you don't have to deal with the headache that comes with self-employment, which is the tax and financial admin. So when you set up with Henry, we provide you with a Henry account. That Henry account looks and feels like a normal bank account with a BSB and account number, but it's not actually a bank account. It's a pass-through account that we use such that every time you get paid, we automatically calculate the right amount of GST, income tax, Medicare levy, student loan. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, it's your ACC levy. And we take that out, we send it off to the tax authorities, and the remainder of the money goes into your account. So you're compliant from day dot. And for those of your listeners who've never been self-employed, they'll be like, why is that a problem? That's not really hard. But the big challenge our customers face is when you go from salaried employment to taking on your side hustle, or deciding to be your own boss, is your pay goes from being net pay, where your employer takes out the tax, to being gross pay, where you're then responsible for the tax. And it's a huge shock that you might get to the end of your first year of self-employment, and all of a sudden that 25, 30K extra that you thought you had, which was yours, that you've gone and spent, the tax office comes to you and goes, no, that was our money and you owe it to us. And so you get into a debt cycle straight away. So we're trying to nip that problem in the bud to start with. And that's the first part of the Henry service. The second part is the accounting software part, which is where you get to access the Henry app, which, I would recommend for all of your listeners and yourself. You can download it for free. It's on the App Store and the Play Store. You can quote, you can invoice, you can upload your business expenses, and they'll get reviewed by one of our expert accountants. You can access reporting, which is really important when you're trying to access credit or get a mortgage, because it's really hard for people who are self-employed. And that links in with the third part, and we're the accountants for our customers, right? So when you produce that report from us, it's an accountant's report signed off with someone who's registered with the Tax Practitioners Board. So when you take that to a bank, they're like, oh, that is an accountant's letter. And so we, as your accountant, we do your quarterly submissions for you. So your BAS or your GST return, we do your income tax return at the end of the year. And the slogan of Henry is never think about tax again, because really, who wants to think about tax, James? It's like the most boring thing in the world.
Well, this is like the biggest problem when you want to start your own business since the beginning of time. Everybody goes, oh, I want to go out and I want to reclaim the ownership of my own life. I want autonomy. I want to be the master of my own destiny, the captain of my own ship. And then you go out and you start something because you want to, unleash that creative being inside and all these other things.
Yep.
And then you end up stuck doing all this bloody paperwork and all these other things. I think, is it Michael Gerber who wrote The E-Myth? That's what that entire book is all about. It's about I think it's about a cake maker that wants to go make cakes, and they end up working in the business rather than on the business, and then they lose their way.
Yeah. You're right. Sorry, go on.
No, I was saying it's about reclaiming your authority, reclaiming your expertise. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, like, we do some pretty regular, like, we analyze our own customer behavior, but we do a lot of independent polling of the market as well in this part of the world. And the average sole trader is spending 7 hours a week on tax and financial admin, which is a ridiculous amount of time. If you think about, like, when you're self-employed, when you're running your own business, the stresses of the commercial side are in and of itself enough, let alone the fact that you're a normal human being who's got, like, perhaps a family and friends and your own hobbies and your social network. And then you add another 7 hours, which is almost another business day of financial admin alongside it. Like, it's like, who would be crazy enough to do this? I mean, everyone listening to this podcast, for one, but apart from that, you sort of got to take a step back and go, is the juice worth the squeeze? And that's what we're trying to solve for, is that actually you can have your cake metaphor, you can have your cake and eat it too with Henry. That's what we're trying to do. Like, be self-employed, have the benefits of it, but let us take care of all the boring stuff.
Yeah, our businesses have a lot in common. That's an interesting statistic. 7 hours a week on tax and admin. We look at the same thing when it comes to the amount of time that people spend hustling to win the next gig.
Yeah.
And no one ever thinks that they spend 7 hours a week on tax. No one ever thinks that they spend a day or two a week hustling to win the next gig. But however, just say you don't focus on your tax at all for 3 weeks. Suddenly after 3 weeks, you end up spending 2.5, 3 days just trying to get your admin and issuing of your invoices and all that other rubbish that you've got to do. If it can be automated, that's so much better. So which one do you want to talk about first? How to get regular work, because consistency is king. How to price your services, how to get paid. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with how to get regular work, right? I think that's the first place you'd want to start so let's take the scenario of someone who's got a skill or got a capability that might be a side hustle, or they may be in full-time work and they're like, you know what, I've had enough of this. I want to step out myself. So a lot of our customers are creative freelancers, for example, right? And an archetypal Henry customer is a graphic designer, for example, and they might be a graphic designer with a lot of skill, working for a company and going, you know what, there's enough available. I've got enough skill set and there's enough market capacity available for me to step out and be a freelance graphic designer myself. And so the principle here that we want to talk about, and, you know, I'm going to give you my perspective, but you're an expert in this stuff. So, you know, please supplement it with your thoughts as well, is like, how do you be a really successful independent graphic designer, right? Not just, I'm just doing it and making ends meet on the side. And I think the first thing is, we live in a hyper niche world of specialization now. And I think one of the great gifts the internet has given us is the reduction of search costs over time, right? And the ability to articulate your service proposition in the most micro way possible, such that you can reach a global network really, really quickly. So that's the good thing. The bad thing is, though, don't pitch yourself just as a generic graphic designer. Go and find the niche around the opportunity that exists in the market and how you fulfill that opportunity. And I'll give you like a personal example. I'm not a graphic designer. I was a management consultant for 13 years. And that is like one of those archetypal generic professions, right? Where you'd be like, oh, I'm a consultant. Like, you can't, it's so difficult to explain what a consultant does to the layman person. But ultimately, all that matters is that your clients understand what you do. And what your clients need to understand what you do is that you have specialization in their niche. So for me, what I specialized in was I would do corporate and business unit strategy focused on superannuation and insurance companies, right? And when it was outside that patch, I would very clearly say that that's not my domain. But inside that patch, I developed reputational experience. I developed networks. I developed an understanding. I was studying that space such that I could become an expert in that space. But I was very clear around the part I was playing in was around there. So the first part is, I think, developing your personal brand and your personal niche as it pertains to a specific area, and finding the largest the part of that you can address.
And for you as the customer, as the client, you always want specialists. I mean, like, you know, this is why we've got ear and eye doctors, and we've got pediatricians and all these other people. I meet lawyers sometimes and I say, hey, you're a lawyer. What do you specialize in? And they go, oh, corporate law, real estate law, family law, animal husbandry law, maritime law, elders law. And you just think, you must not be very good at any of those things.
No.
We had someone come through our world, a woman called Sarah, and she was a generalist marketing consultant. And she was running her business out of a small country town, smallish country town. So her clients were like the local real estate agent, the local realtor, the local pharmacy, the local this, the local that. And she was charging them all about $500 a month on retainer. And she had about 20 of these clients. And some were happy and some were not so happy. And some required a little bit of work, some required a lot of work. And every time she needed to win a new client, she had to write a whole new bespoke plan and proposal for that entire new type of business or that new type of industry. And she did that from a position of scarcity. It was like, I'm in this town, there's not that many clients. Interestingly, Karan, you said, now we live in this world where the world is very small. The cost of finding new clients is very, very, it's almost nothing. It used to be niche publishing was cheap and mainstream was expensive, and it's all changing. It's all changing. But she came into our world and we looked at her client base and we said, which one of these clients do you like working with the most? Who are the least complainers? And she said the wineries. And it was amazing. Just overnight, it was like this light switch went off in her head. And she became Sarah, who helps wineries sell more wine online and at the cellar door. And then before you know it, she's getting interest from wineries all over the planet. And she went from having clients at an average of $500 a month, having clients on retainer on average at $2,400 a month. She fivefold the cost of a client by simply choosing a narrow niche or an audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great example. And I think what you've highlighted there is also finding an industry niche or a sector where your service is consumable at a scale such that you can find sort of repetitive clients where your cost of sale doesn't exceed the amount of effort that you're putting into it, right? So wineries, it's such a great example of, like, I'm going back to now, first year University of Economics, like monopolistic competition, right? Where there's lots and lots of sort of small wineries scattered all around the place, where they're all competing for like cellar space in Dan Murphy's or a liquor store or a bottle shop. But actually, they've all got the same consistent problems when it comes to business operations or marketing or website design, where you can just go and take the same principles and just apply them from the other. One of the other interesting things that we're seeing, because we get this really good scope of the market, where we see these new professions popping up all over the place, where people are applying like perhaps an old skill set to a really new use case. So one of the ones I like seeing, we've got a bunch of customers who do this, which are the rise of wedding magicians. Have you seen it?
Okay.
Yeah. So magic has been around for centuries, right? But you're like, where do you apply magic now? So they're going around in that weird break that you've got between like the wedding ceremony and the reception, where the couples go out to get their photos done, and you've just got cocktails and canapes. They pay a couple of grand for a guy who will go around to little groups of people talking and do card tricks. And he'll just embed himself into a conversation and be like, "Hi, my name's Mike. My name's Alan." And I'll be like, "Hi, weird person. Why are you talking to me?" You'll be like, "Oh, can I show you a trick?" And it's some of the most brilliant magic. I've seen this at like 3 weddings now in the last 2 years. It just popped out of nowhere.
But from a marketing perspective, it's so good because it's not just any magician.
Yeah.
I'm a wedding magician. And that also makes the marketing of it so easy.
Yeah.
Because suddenly you're only targeting the people that are doing the weddings. I actually see two different ways of this playing out at the moment. One is the industry vertical. So that person's gone, I'm going to do weddings, right? So they could be doing bar mitzvahs, they could be doing, they could be doing birthday parties, they could be doing anything, but they've decided to do weddings, which is like the vertical. The other bit is the specialist in expertise. So you could have someone that does entertainment for everybody. You could have someone that does entertainment just for weddings.
Yep.
Or you could have someone that just does magic for weddings. And what we've done is we've tackled the vertical and the skill. So it's the target audience and the skill set, and we've combined it into one. The same way that Sarah, she went from being a marketer for everyone, she became a marketer for wineries, but then suddenly that allowed her to go more narrow on the service offering as well, because it became about how to get more people to the cellar door. So how to get regular work. I think it's really important, as Karan has said, to get industry specific, because it's going to make it easier for you to isolate your audiences, find their audiences. You can speak their language. You can talk to their headaches, their obstacles, their aspirations and desires. Like, are you about to run a wedding? Don't you hate that bit between the two bits where everybody's bored? You can use the language. One more element about this before we move on is that if somebody knows what you do and who your target audience is, they can refer you.
Yep.
If you say, I'm a transformation solutions consultant for everyone, people goes, I don't know how to refer you.
Yeah, totally. I think absolutely. And I think one more comment I'd make on this part is repeatable distribution channels, right? How do you find your work? So to your point around, so for Sarah, the example you're using, like the next part, once she's found her niche, is to, how do I make it easy to get in front of as many like wine clients as I can as possible, right? So is it me going to the wineries expos, perhaps because you've got such a particular niche? But depending on, are you a digital native business? Like, the beauty of it is there's so many distribution channels available now, right? Where you can plonk yourself there, and you can advertise your niche. But really that's again, the wonders of the internet and how you do some targeting. If you've got money in order to do SEO or SEM marketing, it's about, how do you find those funnels or those channels into market such that, I can do the same sales process over and over again, and I know I'm just going to keep finding new clients who are going through that same context or that same thing. Like, hopefully you're going to get married once in your life, right? But you're going to be Googling wedding entertainment. So you want to make sure that my website is top through that repeatable sales channel as well.
Or you've just got relationships with every florist within 30 kilometers of where you operate. I love that language. Repeatable distribution channels. That's clearly someone who was once a management consultant.
Yeah, you can take the boy out of Deloitte, but
you have to Deloitte out of the way. So if you want to get repeatable work, narrow down niche, and that allows you to unlock repeatable distribution channels. Okay, let's talk about the pricing piece. This is terrifying.
Yep.
I still find this terrifying. I've been running businesses for 20 years. And recently we did a little bit of a pricing rejig, and we changed up our pricing. But how to price your services, because services are not like a loaf of bread. No. There is no industry metric. You don't go to the supermarket and you see a whole bunch of milk bottles next to each other. You don't see a bunch of service providers all next to each other with a tag underneath.
Yep, totally. You're right. And I think there's many, to your point there, there's many ways to skin this cat, right? Like you can think about, like, actually, I think in the conversations we've had with our customers, or just thinking about the times where I've had to price services myself, you can get very confused very quickly. So let's think about a sort of a step-by-step approach, or just some considerations you might have. So I think that a good way to start, particularly if you're new to self-employment, is to work out your minimums, right? So think about what is the cost of either doing business, or what's the cost of living the lifestyle you want to live, right, at a reasonable level. And perhaps a good place to start there is to go, the lowest amount you should charge is the amount you can charge in order to pay your bills and pay yourself. And a good anchoring heuristic for you, again, is if you're let's take that graphic designer example again, is what would you earn if you were full-time doing that? Or what would someone with your experience earn full-time doing that? And that's a good bit of price anchoring for you to go, that's the minimum I would charge. Because when you're self-employed, you're taking on the risk of finding clients yourself, and you're adding in the burden of the admin that goes with administering it. So you've got to add a 20, 30, 40, 50% risk premium. But that sort of sets your floor to go, okay, I'm not going to charge below that on an aggregated basis. And then you've kind of got to work back going, okay, I'm going to divide, if it's an annual number, I'm going to divide it by 12 to give me sort of the monthly minimum I need to make. And then you need to take some time away, because I'm going to have some time where there'll be periods where I don't have clients. So let's call that, I'm going to have 60% utilization perhaps, because 40% of the week I'm going to be looking for work. I'm going to be doing my admin. I'm going to be running around town. And from there, you basically got to go 60% of the week with that 12 divided, how much money do I need to make in that 60%, which then frames up sort of a minimum hourly rate that you might charge. I think that's the first thing, is working out your minimums. Then the next thing is about what are the pricing mechanisms you can use, right? So you sort of got I can charge by the hour. I can do a fixed rate pricing thing, or I can do some sort of package deals where I'm coming up with pre-configured outcomes. Each one of those, I think, constructs has got pros and cons. I know I'm conscious of time and we want to cover up other things, but if I can rattle through them quickly, James.
Please do.
The benefit of a time and materials or an hourly based approach is you have the benefit that if the project is poorly scoped, that you don't take on the commercial risk of it blowing out of proportion, or your client changing the terms of the scope on you. The problem with that is, though, you price anchor yourself around a particular rate by the hour, such that if you build efficiencies over time, and if you go down the repeatable path, particularly if it's repeatable with the same client, you can't actually extract more margin out of that piece of work. So that's the big con around it. You're moving on to fixed rate pricing. The great benefit of fixed rate pricing is there's more predictability in terms of how much you're going to earn. But if there is a massive amount of scope creep, or you don't have all the structures in place to control the outcome of the work, it will erode your margin completely. And as someone who's self-employed, you've got no wriggle room there, right? You can't palm this off to a junior or find your way out of it. You're stuck delivering that at an increasingly lower margin. And the last part, which is sort of the pre-configured package deals, is you may end up doing a lot of work going, hey, you could pick out of outcome A, B, C, or D, and they don't even understand what they're buying. If we use that wedding magician example, I'm going outcome A, outcome B. I was like, what the hell does a wedding magician even do, mate? Don't you just card tricks, and you spent all that time configuring these packages when your target market or your client doesn't even understand it. Whereas if it is a well understood project, then you can do some very creative commercial anchoring, going, I'll give you the cheap one, the medium one, or the expensive one, with a view that you want them to pick the medium one, right? So yeah, so that's sort of just a short primer on how you might think about pricing and your commercial model when you're self-employed.
I think it also goes back to that first piece when we talked about how to get regular work. If you're going to pick a narrow audience or a niche, what ultimately ends up happening is that all the projects are the same. So the wedding magician can come up with 3 packages and someone gets to choose. Sarah, who's selling to wineries, can once again have 3 different packages. And she'll know what the clients are going to need within those packages because she's dealing with the same people all the time. But I don't know, to pick something really wild like engineering, right? If you were given the job of trying to come up with a fuel injector system for a rocket ship for NASA, that is it's a once in a lifetime job and you've got no idea. And if you pitch that at a flat rate, and you get that scope creep. I love that expression, scope creep, because it's terrifying, isn't it? Should be a Stephen King book called Scope Creep. But yeah, and that's the type of situation where you'd want to charge by the hour. My preference always is packaging above charging by the hour. And the reason for that is because I find generally they're easier to sell. Because there's a limit. People know how much they're going to buy, but they don't know how many hours are going to be required. It's also, you can do that anchor pricing. We talk about the Patsy, the preferred, the premium.
Yeah.
So we have these 3 options, and we always want people to go for the preferred. And then occasionally they choose the premium, and your prices just go up. What was but the most important thing for me when I think about those 2 alternatives, hourly and the package, is that when you're selling by the hour, and I know that a lot of freelancers sell by the hour and it's the way that the industry is done and it's an often way to get good work, is that there is this real risk that, and no one talks about this, but there's this real risk that you'll end up developing this master-slave type relationship. And that's because they're paying you by the hour and you're my slave for that hour, or when I pay you, you're mine. Yeah. And I don't think that's healthy.
No, yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. It's interesting how you use the Patsy, the premium, and the
preferred. Yeah. So you start up with the premium. We've got the $10,000 option. Then you introduce the Patsy, which is like 3,000, but it's still amazing in comparison to the 10. Yeah. And then you great value, and then you go for your preferred, which is 4,000, and it's cheaper in relative to the premium. Yeah. It's double the value of the $3,000 option, but only $1,000 more.
Yeah.
And they all have the one in the middle. And that's what you see when you buy popcorn,
Of course. Yeah. It's how I choose my car washes.
Yeah.
But I like that the same. I think in the, you use as a wine example, I've done some consulting work in wine, and I think they use good, better, best, right? Because there's no such thing as not good wine, right?
Yeah.
My clients who'll go unnamed, but at the time we were working for them, they had the highest market share of I think the uni students would call it goon sacks or wines in Australia. And I'm like, I'm not sure it meets the threshold for good. But anyway.
That's right. And the science around wine pricing in a restaurant is next level as well. So number 1, how to get regular work. It's great if you can find a narrow audience, a narrow vertical, be more specific about what it is that you do, how to price up your service. We talk about minimum moolah. Know what your minimum moolah is. When you go to get a job with a company and you're applying for a job, if they said, the job's 60,000 and you know that it's costing you $90,000 to live, you're not going to take that job. It doesn't satisfy your minimum moolah. So when you're going out on your own, what is your minimum moolah? I don't know what you've got numbers. You've got access to huge amounts of data, and it'd be interesting to explore this. But in our world, we say if you're charging less than $75 an hour, you're already about to shoot yourself in the foot, because at 40 hours a week over a year, it works out to be about $140,000 a year, and $40,000 of that is going to go into overheads and expenses and marketing and all the other stuff. And then there's the time where you've got work, then there's the time you don't got work. And if you're not at least aspiring for a 6-figure salary, maybe don't do it. So start with your minimum moolah, and then there's different pricing packages and options. Now, you've also given me as a topic, how to get paid.
Yep.
This is interesting. I mean, like, it's not really quite, is it not how to win the work? It's how to get paid.
No, I think this is where we get into, let's into the realm where Henry really excels, right? Which is perhaps the less sexy part of being self-employed or being your own boss, which is the administration of your work, right? So unfortunately, the secrets are very mechanical and rather rote and very repetitive, right? So the big and a big fail point that we see, and it's a real struggle for all SMEs, but particularly in the micro SME segment, is the concept of making sure you're invoicing promptly, you're invoicing correctly, you're chasing your invoices, you're making sure that you're sending your invoices to the right person and that they're paying it. I think people are so used to, if they've been in salary jobs for every year, my employer pays me on the same day of every month, and therefore I can architect my whole life around that, right? Because my pay slip comes in once a month on the 15th or the 30th or the 31st. And then my expenses are, if you set up like your credit card repayments or your mortgage repayments or your rent, it goes out the following week, right? Whereas when you're self-employed, like you'll get paid whenever, but based on when you invoice and whether you chase it up. And I think that's one of the things that we see really difficult. So you've got to send professional invoices. They're not just the date, the banking details and the contact details. You got to make sure if you're in Australia and New Zealand, if you're GST registered, you got to make sure you add your ABN. You got to make sure you put the invoice terms in. And then, one thing we see with a number of our customers is Henry provides an invoicing service, but they'll want to add different things for an invoice. Like I want to make it look more glossy and I want to make it look more compelling. And I think the secret is no one in accounts payable cares if your invoice is not, right?
Yeah.
They want it to be legible and have all the correct information.
Yep.
And the challenge is when your invoice gets rejected is, do you have a mechanism where you can change the invoice and get it right correctly and you can chase it up yourself? So if you have several clients, you are the one that's responsible for knowing when an invoice needs to be paid. You're the one that's responsible for marking it as paid. And if it's been partially paid, then working out how you're going to get the rest of the amount. So that whole basically your own accounts receivable function, right? Which is really taxing when you're a sole trader.
It's emotionally draining. Yeah. And you're like, oh, so-and-so hasn't paid me, but I don't want to bother them. And I don't want to come across as a pest. And I don't want to be seen as needy. And I don't want to be seen as desperate. And what if they fire me because I need that work? And it's a terrible scenario. But if you have the systems, all you need to do is follow the systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we've learned over time is because Henry started off as a tax calculation and tax payment service. But in order for there to be a tax event, there needs to be a payment event. So we created the ability for you to accept payments into a Henry account. But then for there to be a payment, there needs to be a request for payment, which is an invoice. And so we're just following our customer. And so we built an invoicing functionality. And what we were watching was people were sending Henry invoices and lots of invoices were going unpaid, and sort of watching the customer behavior going, man, these self-employed people, cash is king, right? So the quicker you get paid, the more you can move your life and your business along. And so we created this invoice chasing feature. And essentially what it does is it's automated. So at the point at which an invoice is, if it's 2 days overdue, we send an email to your client saying, hi, this invoice is overdue. Can you please pay it? Basically along those lines.
And it's a standardized message and you don't have to worry about what am I going to write in it?
But it comes from your accountant. And so it seems even more serious, right? So therefore, to your point around like going, oh, I don't want to wreck the relationship, I'm a bit worried about it. But if it comes from your accountant, it feels like it's coming from your accounts payable function, right? So it's like accounts receivable function rather. So you're like, the client will be like, oh, I better take this seriously. That finance team's chasing me around the invoice, right? So that way we obfuscate that really difficult conversation you don't want to be having with your client, because it's like, oh, look, the system is chasing you, better listen to the system, or the finance team's chasing you, better listen to them, right? So that's the way we've creatively solved it for our clients, which seems to work. We saw a sharp increase in the volume of invoice payments, and then getting paid on time as well, which is a good thing.
What we all want.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
If I bring this right back to some of the things that you're talking about in the beginning, you were talking about the different problems that Henry solves. And one of them, it was a throwaway comment. You said, oh yeah, because the banks don't really like self-employed people. And I know this because I've been self-employed for 20 years. And to get my first home loan was an absolute nightmare. It was so tough. But however, if you've got a consistent payment history that's all been documented, suddenly you're going to have a different experience. Another scenario, and I've seen this time and time again, Christmas is coming up. So Christmas is swinging around and you go to one of those family barbecues. I've got lots of friends that are self-employed. You can always tell the ones that have way too many invoices outstanding just before Christmas because everybody needs to get paid before Christmas, because then there's like 2 or 3 weeks in Australia and New Zealand, at least, when everybody goes on holiday.
Yep.
And if you don't get those invoices paid before Christmas, you have a miserable Christmas.
Yeah, that's a really, really good shout. That's a really good shout. On your earlier point around banks, they don't really understand self-employed customers because they deem them as small businesses, but really they're retail plus. I just got a mortgage recently, and I'm a salaried employee at Henry. But and I'm like, because I work in the sector, so I'm like, well, I'm just going to apply for a mortgage to everybody because that's how I get my kicks on a weekend. And one of these neobank fintechs who claims to have the fastest mortgage approval process in Australia clearly didn't approve my mortgage very quickly. And they wrote back to me 3 days later saying, we have deemed you to be self-employed. And I said, what do you mean you deemed me? That's not your decision to make. And it was because I'm a director of Henry. And therefore, if I'm a director of a company, I'm by default self-employed. And I said, here are my pay slips. They're like, no. For you to prove to us that you're not self-employed, you need to get an independent accountant's letter, get it signed and send it to us. And I was like, well, this is ridiculous. Like, one, here's my pay slips. I'm salaried employed. And secondly, like, that's not accessible to everyone. I mean, I have access to accountants because I'm obviously in an accounting firm, but for the regular Joe, that's incredibly difficult. And from the outset, that's theoretically a neobank fintech who's got a higher risk appetite than a large bank. And that was their experience. That was my experience through them. So I'm like, there's a long, long way to go for the industry to get this sector.
Well, you're working in a business which has big, audacious goals to make the life of a certain type of business owner so much easier. Ours is the same. I mean, like our goal is similar. Talking about your headaches before and people are working on the business rather than in the business. Our job is to help people end the cycle of hunt, pitch, deliver, where they're putting in 2 to 3 days a week, just trying to win the work. They hunt for the work, they pitch for the work, they win it. I don't know, man, but I would love to see a future where Henry decides to expand its product offering into the home loan industry. Pass that on to James and Claire. And because you would have the data. Would have the data to be able to make safe, informed decisions where you could get home loans for self-employed people with as little fuss as possible, because they would have all the data in your system and you'd be able to track and monitor and make informed decisions based on previous behaviors.
Look, it's a very, very sharp insight. And, I'm also Henry's chief strategy officer. So if you're looking for a gig in a strategy team, mate, it's because with a brain like that,
there you go. Well, you can come and have a look. You can come and have a look at my business model sometime as well too. All right. On that note, thank you so much. We've learned how to get regular work, how to price your services, how to get paid, how to tackle 3 of the biggest challenges if you're self-employed or you're thinking of becoming self-employed and making your side hustle, or starting a side hustle or launching it into a real thing. Thank you so much, Karan Anand.
Thank you so much, James. Really, really great to be on the podcast.